The Planning Commission meeting can be viewed live on the city's website, which is www.cityofvacaville.com, or on cable channel 26. Instructions to participate from computer are provided on the website at cityofvacaville.com, and you can connect via the link that is listed on the agenda for tonight's meeting. This is a new item that we haven't read before. If you're following along on the telephone and prompted for a participant ID, please press the pound sign to be connected to the meeting. So that's a step that has not been there before. If you're on the telephone and are prompted for a participant ID, press the pound sign. If you're planning to participate, you'll need to follow along on the telephone, not on channel 26 because there's a broadcast delay. Callers who wish to comment can raise their hand by pressing *9. Depending upon the individual settings on your phone, you may need to press *6 after you are unmuted by the host in order to open your microphone. And computer users requesting to speak can click the raise hand button within their Zoom controls. So that covers what I need to go over for the beginning of tonight's meeting. The next item we have, item number 1, is for the secretary to call the roll.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Chair McCauley.
Here.
Vice Chair Fortney.
I'm here.
Commissioners Aldridge.
Here.
Beaumont. Commissioner Alan Johnson.
Here.
Brett Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Lightfoot.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. If you'd all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Baderi, item number 3 is communications. Do we have any communications?
Yes, we do, Chairperson. We have one item, an email from Mr. Doug Chen of Discovery Builders with some information related to the vehicle miles traveled item, item 8C. And Mr. Chen makes some comments regarding the procedures for developing the model to analyze vehicle miles traveled. Asks that workshops be held as that modeling is developed, and asks that he be included on the notification list for the item and for any future meetings. And that information will be forwarded to the project team.
Thank you, Mr. Baderi. And I did receive that email forwarded by the secretary, and then it is printed out in front of me here this evening. Are there any other communications?
No, no others.
Then the next item is the approval of the agenda for this evening's meetings. Do any commissioners have proposed modifications to the agenda? Hearing none, I will ask for the secretary to call a vote on the proposal to approve the agenda as proposed.
Commissioner Aldridge.
Yes.
Alan Johnson.
Yes.
Brett Johnson.
Yes.
Lightfoot.
Yes.
Vice Chair Fortney.
Yes.
Chair McCauley.
Yes. So the agenda is approved as proposed. Item number 5 is business from the floor. This is a time to address the commission for issues that are not on the agenda, but that are within the commission's subject matter jurisdiction. A maximum of 3 minutes per speaker or group of speakers per the government code and the Vacaville Municipal Code. I do see there are 6 attendees. Are there any of them that wish to speak from business from the floor? I see one person with the phone number ending in 488 with their hand raised for business from the floor. So go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, commissioners. This is Teresa Stout, and Last week on Tuesday, there was an informational online meeting for the Oak Grove Apartments, which are going to be a new affordable and supportive housing development on Monte Vista, down close to Orchard, by the Orchard and Maples apartment complex. Anyway, very informative meeting. There's probably about 6 or 8 people from Eden Housing that spoke. And I had a few concerns regarding this project. And I know that it hasn't come to you yet, but in the future it will. But anyway, it's a 67 unit, 2 buildings. One of them will be 4-story, the other one will be 3-story. But my issues are twofold. One will be parking, because at this point, for 67 units, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, there are only going to be 60 parking places, which is 0.9 per unit. Now, that's kind of like getting on a Boeing 747 and getting a 0.5 seat. You can't sit there because it's not a full seat. So these folks, 67 units, and some of them 3 bedrooms, the state says that they should have 67 parking places, but Eden Housing is being granted some concessions at this point. But none of this even allows for family, friend, any visitors, anything extra, just 1 car per unit. In this particular case, 0.9 cars per unit. Okay, so that feels problematic to me. It's not fair to the folks who will be living there. And then the second part is that I'm hoping when this continues on its direction forward, that we really look at egress, because when the fires came through in August and everyone north of us were evacuated from Pleasant Valley down, most of them came down Orchard Avenue. And so we're talking 67 more units of folks on top of the 130 more homes on Farmstead. And then I think we need to be really careful as we look at egress for our city for this new development. And those are my concerns that will be coming up in a meeting shortly. Thank you.
Thank you for your participation. For those who are not familiar with business from the floor, the commission cannot address at this time issues that are brought up, but we do appreciate, and often under commission comments at the end, will provide some direction to staff for something we may ask for later. But that would be at the end of the meeting. At this point, the best I can do is thank you for participating and ask if any other participants. I see Wendy Brecken's name has a raised hand on my screen. Ms. Brecken, go ahead.
Hi, this is Wendy Brecken.
Okay, you're live. Go ahead.
Thank you. I kind of want to piggyback on to Ms. Stout's comment about egress and in the last fire, the evacuation. I know in Southtown, it took people up to 3 hours to get out. I think Air Force Parkway and Peabody was congested. And even over here in the Browns Valley area, there was some congestion and people wanted to, use that back path around Centennial Park, Allison Parkway to get out and couldn't because it was locked. My question is, can this be maybe an agenda item for the Planning Commission to consider evacuation routes in case of future, multiple fires like we recently had? Or is it maybe some kind of advisory or ad hoc committee? Would that be something that you would consider so that we can have maybe some citizen involvement planning for evacuation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brecken. I appreciate your participation in tonight's meeting. Again, commissioner comments at the end. There may be any discussion on this, but it's not something we can take action on tonight. Is there anyone else from our attendee list who would like to bring something up under business from the floor? We don't see any other hand raised on that, so I'm going to close business from the floor at this point. Our next item is the consent calendar. The only item on the consent calendar tonight is the minutes from our September 15th meeting. Do any commissioners have proposed amendments to the meeting? Amendments to the minutes? There are no proposed amendments to the minutes. I would like to call for a vote on approval of the consent calendar with the minutes as proposed. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Commissioners Aldridge,
Yes.
Alan Johnson,
Aye.
Brett Johnson,
Yes.
Lightfoot,
Aye.
Vice Chair Fortney,
Yes.
Chair McCauley.
Yes. The consent calendar is approved. Our next two items are presentations. Presentation A on National Community Planning Month and Presentation B on Fire Protection Standards. These are both presentations by staff with no formal action by the Commission. We will, after the presentations and Commission comments, open things up so members of the public who are participating can also provide any comments that they wish. But again, there is no action to be taken on either of these. And with that, I will turn things over on item 7A, National Community Planning Month, to Payman Bavon, the city planner. Mr. Bavon, you may proceed.
Good evening, Commissioners. This is Albert Enold, Associate Planner with the Current Planning Division. I'll be heading up this presentation for October, which is National Community Planning Month, and we wanted to bring some information to the Commission about what that is. With me tonight, I have Current Planner, Planning Technician Sal Uribe that will be assisting with that, Advanced Planning Technician Maya Amahai, and also Building Inspector Fabi Battistella, who will be also assisting on providing some information to the Commission about National Community Planning Month. So here's a brief history about community planning. In the U.S., community planning kind of emerged as a professional field in the early 1900s, but that was as a response to overcrowding and unhealthy living conditions that materialized in large cities such as New York and Chicago. And so what we saw in 1904 was the first land use regulations, and those were established as parts of Los Angeles. The first permanent official planning commission was established in 1907 in the state of Connecticut. And then the first comprehensive plan was written in 1909 in Chicago. And we'll see that the first zoning restrictions were adopted by New York City in 1916. So really quick progression from the first land use regulations that were shown in Los Angeles in 1904 to 1916, where you're seeing first zoning regulations kind of take off. Well, what that looks like here in Vacaville for community development starts with our motto, which is community, design, and livability. And the way that we achieve that is through three divisions within this department, consisting of current planning, advanced planning, and our building division. And that group consists of 16 staff members. And really, community development in Vacaville, we've got goals that we have and objectives and policies for implementing the city's general plan, which is the broad, large document that guides how land use works within the city of Vacaville. And among all of these goals and objectives, we're looking at preserving, enhancing the aesthetic quality of the community. We look at promoting the stability of those existing land uses that already conform to the general plan. And we're maintaining and enhancing significant natural environmental resources, such as open space and the creekways. Part of our efforts, we're looking at promoting sound and diversified economic base. And we're safeguarding the public welfare through the regulation of the design, construction, and use of structures. We're also looking to promote the development of a safe and efficient circulation system throughout Vacaville. And we're also looking to ensure adequate consideration for urban design in the city. Everybody likes a really good looking building and subdivision. And that process, so that new development enhances the image and the quality of life in the city of Vacaville. The way that that type of stuff is kind of implemented is through the zoning ordinance. And zoning ordinances are typically prepared to distribute those various land use designations within the city. We'll also classify a variety of uses within those designations, identifying what types of things are allowed, what types of things are conditionally permitted, and what types of things are prohibited too. It's also meant to identify public noticing requirements that are meant to notify the public and keep them informed about what's going on and give them an opportunity to comment on development projects that come to the Planning Commission or go to the City Council. But it also gives them an opportunity to appeal to the different decision makers that are out there, such as the Director of Community Development or to the Planning Commission. Zoning ordinance is also established to develop standards such as building heights, setbacks, lot coverage, parking, signage, and landscaping. So that way development, when they're coming in, they have a set of standards that they can look at and they can use that to develop their project. The zoning ordinance is also intended to provide procedures to help grant minor and major exceptions to development standards, such as parking or building height. And they're also meant to allow an avenue for changes to the general plan or zoning ordinance. That's a little bit about what community development is. Here to talk a little bit about current planning is Severity.
Thank you, Albert. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. This is Saul Riva, Planning Technician with the current Planning Division in Community Development. And I'll be talking a little bit about the responsibilities of the current Planning Division. As current planning is responsible for the day-to-day planning operations of the city, this includes welcoming residents and the overall public to our counter. We help out with questions regarding major development, but also typical questions that residents may have, like adding a fence or adding a shed, a pool to your house. The current planning division has a city planner and associate planner and a planning technician. As I've mentioned, some of the responsibilities are responding to public counter and inquiries. We also help with home occupation permits. We review design reviews, conditional use permits, and other planning entitlements. We also help with building permits and improvement plans. And we review those to ensure that there's compliance with the conditions of approval. We also participate in administrative and public hearings, such as Planning Commission, City Council, and other county or state agencies. Also, we participate in neighborhood meetings and other public engagement efforts. And then to conclude the slide, we also help out with zoning enforcement and making sure that we take care of any health and safety issues that may be occurring in the city. If we can proceed with the next slide, please. So some of the examples of the recent projects that we've reviewed and we've worked with the public include the Vacaville Hotel, the Hyatt House and Commercial Center over there on Vacaville Parkway and East Monte Vista Avenue. Also, the Home 2 Suites Hotel, Genentech, they're doing a solar project. We've also reviewed a number of house plan designs for different subdivisions in the city, like Brighton Landing, the Farmstead, Roberts Ranch, and Cheyenne. The division also is involved in minor residential variances for patio covers and accessory structures. We also review things like accessory dwelling units and other projects that we've reviewed in the past year include the Papen Commercial Center and the Alamo Mixed Use Project. Next slide, please. Just to summarize some of the achievements of current planning in 2019 and to give the Planning Commission an idea of the amount of projects that we might help the public with over the course of a year. In 2019, we did 4 house plans applications. We also processed 2 custom homes and 5 ADUs. We also helped with a review of a public park, 2 buildings, 2 new apartment complexes, 5 new restaurants. We reviewed 228 home occupation permits, 21 retail-related permits, true preliminary review applications, and 57 true removal permits. Next slide, please. And some of the miscellaneous things that we did in 2019 included sending out 46 administrative hearing notices. We sent out 15 planning commission or city council hearing notices for meetings that we participated in. We helped with the preparation of 4 mitigated negative declarations, did 17 notice of exemptions, and did 6 reaffirmations of environmental impact analysis. We also helped the building department with about 403 plan checks, 61 sign permits, and 178 final inspections. And over the course of a year, we helped with 678 business licenses. Also, we helped approximately 1,300 counter inquiries and approximately 1,800 counter hours. So that concludes the presentation for current planning. If we can go to the next slide, please. I think Maya will be presenting the Advanced Planning Division.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Saul. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. This is Maya Amichai. I'm Planning Technician for Advanced Planning. So the Advanced Planning Division is responsible for implementing the community's long-term vision for the city in conjunction with regional and statewide planning goals. And there are regional planning bodies, and then of course the state writes policies that affect local policies that the Advanced Planning Division is responsible for keeping up with. So we have 2 senior planners and 1 planning technician. Responsibilities include writing policy documents, such as the general plan, which was described earlier and which you're familiar with, keeping up to date on and implementing statewide policy changes that affect local planning processes, updating and implementing the general plan, which includes pretty regular updates to the different elements of the general plan, and community outreach and engagement to ensure policies reflect the community's wants and needs. And this past year, we've done a lot of community outreach, in particular for the downtown specific plan. Next slide, please. So some examples of projects we work on are general plan updates, the housing element, and there's a housing element update cycle coming up, annexations, ordinances such as animal keeping and cannabis, the downtown Vacaville specific plan, which we've been working on this year and has had a lot of public input, and will create long-term plans for changing our downtown. The Green Tree Master Development, and Roberts Ranch and the Farm and Alamo Creek master plans. And thank you. I'll pass it on to Fabi in the Building Division.
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Fabiola. I'm a building inspector with the Building Division. I'm going to speak a little bit of what the Building Division has been doing, has been doing since 2019 and on. So the Building Division is responsible for ensuring the compliance with the California Building Code. We are consisted of a chief building official, a building services coordinator, a plans examiner, 3 building inspectors, and 2 administrative clerks. Some of our responsibilities are to ensure that the plans comply with the California Building Code. We respond to public counter inquiries and we help the public. We issue in-person and online building permits. We coordinate the building permit applications with all the other city departments. We perform inspections for new constructions and remodels. We also provide a public certified access specialist consultations and inspections. So if some business in town would like a certified access specialist consultation, we are happy to provide that. We also investigate complaints related to the maintenance and accessibility of the buildings. Next slide, please. Some of the examples of projects that we permit and we do inspections are the biotech facilities, such as Genentech campus, the Hyatt Place Hotel, the Kia dealership remodel, Storage Pro that is just finishing up. And we also review construction plans for subdivisions such as Brighton Landing, Vanden Estates, Cheyenne, and North Village. And we also had Ashton Park that just finished up. Next slide, please. Now I would like to talk a little bit about the 2019 achievement and highlights of the building division. We have issued a total of 4,973 permits. And the permits, these are not all the permits, but some of them are, we issued 81 commercial remodels, 47 new business, so new tenant improvements. We issued 378 single-family dwellings and 2 accessory dwelling units. We have issued 182 residential remodels, 15 residential additions. Last year, we also issued permits for storage facility, restaurants, car wash, warehouse building, a retail building, around 1,400 solar permits, 70 swimming pools, 95 patio covers, and 14 generators. There's a lot more permits. This is just a highlight of what we've been doing. So here's some more information. The total permits that we've issued over the counter is 2,644 permits. 2,329 permits were issued online. 83 code enforcement cases we had last year, and we have 1,125 plan checks. And we performed 12,346 inspections. I would like to bring out some activities that we've been doing during the COVID-19 months. We have been really busy. We have not slowed down. We have issued during COVID-19 months 3,072 permits. We plan check 764 projects. We had 30 code enforcement cases. We performed 9,811 inspections and 788 counter appointments. Just to have an idea, in comparison to 2019, we have issued during COVID months 16 new commercial tenant improvements, 52 commercial remodels. We have issued 270 single-family dwellings. Last year we had 378. So we are going to exceed the 378 by the end of 2020. We have issued already 8 accessory dwelling units during the COVID-19 months. We have issued a total of 92 swimming pools, when last year we issued only 70. And another interesting is that we have issued 44 generator permits, when last year, the entire year of 2019, we only had 14. Also, our homeowners are also busy. We have issued 122 residential remodels and 14 residential additions during COVID-19 months. So this is a little bit of what the building division has been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabi, Sal, and Maya. That was great. And I think the biggest takeaway from all of this is just to give the commission a pretty good idea of what community development is, what community planning is, and how it's not just one person, but it takes an entire team to help move things forward. And as you saw what Fabi was describing, just because we're in COVID doesn't mean things are slowing down. In fact, we're actually seeing things still be busy, and if not busier, people still wanting to do things for their homes, put in swimming pools, and people still wanting to have businesses. And I think that's a good reflection and a good healthy sign of development for us. So that concludes our presentation. We're here to answer any questions from the commission or the public.
Albert, I will note that your presentation left out the number of staff reports you prepared and presented to planning commissioners and city council. You know, something in addition to your workload, including what you've done tonight. I'm going to look up first on my screen and see if any of the planning commissioners have questions or comments for staff on the presentation at this time. I don't see any hands from the commission or participants, so I'll look over to our attendees list. This would be an opportunity for any members of the public who wish to comment or ask questions on the presentation we've just received. And I'll give a few seconds because I want to make sure people have the opportunity to raise their hand. And I don't see any coming up on that. Ms. Stout's hand has just come up. So Teresa Stout, you've got 3 minutes for comments or questions. Go ahead.
Just a quick question, and thank you for taking it. Great presentation. Code compliance. I heard the number from last year and the one from this year. Have all the folks come into compliance at this point? Is it a fairly long process? Do you guys end up in court with them, or how does that work? Because it sounds like, I mean, in everything, it sounds like you guys are doing a fantastic job. I'm unsure of that little bit there. Thank you.
Well, I could provide some type of response about that. I don't know what those number looks like. What's the total number of code enforcement cases that we receive, because there's a variety of them, from issues with neighbors, issues with trees, or problems with weed abatement that can be simply solved by people just going out to these larger properties and mowing the grass, and then that's done. So we don't know that information at this time, and I'm not quite sure if that's something that's easily attainable.
Maybe I can add a couple of Ms. South. This is Payment Vivan with City Planner. A large number of in terms of where planning receives complaints regarding zoning violations, a large number of them end up coming into compliance just by communicating with them. And we do have sometimes folks that are eager about, a home project, or eager about accessory structure, and they really don't think there is a problem with it, and they go ahead and install things, and then they find out that there are issues. A lot of them do end up correcting the violations themselves. We haven't had to, sue anybody or take anybody to court. Folks have generally come into compliance on their own. Some take a little bit longer than others. We've had some that have, taken several weeks to resolve, and some that have taken a couple of years to resolve, where we sort of go back and forth. And the council some years ago identified zoning enforcement as really prioritizing those that are health and safety related. And not all the zoning enforcement items that we have are health and safety. Some of them are perhaps aesthetics, or some of them are just where a neighbor feels like their quality of life has been affected by something that a neighbor has done. So those that are health and safety related are resolved. I would say always are resolved, and I would say within either several weeks or a couple of months.
Great,
Thank you.
Teresa, your hand is still up. Do you have additional questions or comments?
No, I didn't know how to take my hand down.
Okay. Well, it's now down and you're muted, so thank you on that. And with that, I think that concludes presentation 7A. So we'll go on to 7B, which is fire protection standards near wildland fire hazards. And the staff contact is listed as Jill Childress. So Jill, I assume you were the one who were making the presentation, and
Yes,
you may
sir.
proceed.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. Tonight I'm here to discuss construction adjacent to open space and abatement of weeds within the city of Vacaville limits. Next slide, please. Requirements for construction adjacent to open space can be found in the Vacaville Municipal Code under section 14.20.290. Next slide. Under this section in the VMC, you will find all of our requirements for construction adjacent to open space. A few of those requirements are additional access road around the site, and this road must be kept clear of vegetation. These can include EVAs or emergency vehicle access roads, irrigated landscaping using fire resistant vegetation, non-combustible fire breaks, the use of non-combustible fencing when next to open space, Class A roof materials, boxed-in eaves, and maintaining 100 feet of defensible space around structures.
Joe, I'm going to ask you real quick. You say Class A roofing materials. Could you explain to everybody what that is?
Yeah, so those are typically concrete or clay roofing tiles, composite shingles, or metal roofs.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay, so we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. Oh, yes. Attached, you see our fire hazard severity zone map. This is actually at the 2017 CAL FIRE fire hazard severity zone map. If you take a close look at the map, the yellow represents moderate fire hazard. The city does own some property in the moderate fire hazard area. If you take a look, it's not necessarily within the city limits, but the city does own property within the yellow area. The orange represents high hazard. And if you take even a closer look, you will also find that the city does not have any high hazard areas, according to the CAL FIRE maps. And back in 2008, CAL FIRE determined that Solano County has no very high hazard severity zones in the local response areas. So this is a good map for us to take a look at when determining some of our fire standards adjacent to these areas, especially the high and very high. We don't need to worry about very high, but adjacent to the high areas. Next slide, please. The Vacaville Fire Department has added section 304.1.2.1 to the 2019 California Fire Code. This section provides the requirements for weed abatement within the city of Vacaville based on parcel size. The city's requirements are currently more restrictive than the state's. Next slide, please. Basic requirements for weed abatement are properties 1 acre in size or smaller shall abate all weeds on their property. All other properties are required to create a 30-foot fire break around the perimeter of their property. Clear weeds within 100 feet of structures. Remove tree branches that are within 10 feet of chimney or stovepipes. Trim trees within 100 feet of structures, and these trees shall be pruned not less than 4 to 6 feet from the ground. And weeds shall be removed within 30 feet of all tanks. A good example of this type of tank would be a propane tank. We typically see this more out in the country. Next slide, please. This is just the first page and an example of the courtesy notice that we send out every year. We do mail these out every year by April 15th. This year's notice went out to all of our residents and property owners on April 3rd. Next slide, please. Inspections for compliance. So our code enforcement staff begins inspection of all the lots within the city starting on June 1st. If property owners are not in compliance by June 1st, code enforcement will issue a notice and order to abate. Please keep in mind this is on top of the courtesy notice that we did mail out to all of our residents and property owners back in April. So this is the second notice they get from the city. We estimate about 70 to 75% of property owners are in compliance or are in partial compliance by June 1st. So we feel that's a very high percentage. If property owners choose not to comply with the notice in order to abate by the established date, then code enforcement will proceed going through our process of getting an abatement warrant. This season, code enforcement was granted 2 abatement warrants by the Solano County courts. Next slide. Thank you. Regrowth notices. Regrowth notices are mailed out each year. These notices can be issued anytime between the months of August and October, depending on the conditions, the weather, late rains, even wind can play into that and how quickly things are drying out and regrowing. Each lot is re-inspected again for compliance with the VMC. This year's regrowth notices were sent out to our residents in September. Next slide, please. This is a photo taken after the LNU fire. This photo shows examples of our requirements for construction adjacent to open space. As you can see, there's tile roofs, stucco exteriors, non-combustible fencing, paved access roads and fire breaks. And this photo also shows the perimeter of this parcel being mowed and the fire stopping there due to the perimeter being mowed per our requirements. Next slide, please. Again, this is another photo from the LNU fire. Once again, this photo shows the paved access roads and the fire breaks for this particular subdivision. Next slide, thank you. If residents or business owners have any questions or concerns about weed abatement or vegetation, they can feel free to call the City of Vacaville Code Enforcement at 449-5693, or we can be reached by the email address provided below. And I appreciate your time this evening and for allowing me to present. The Chief and I are both here if you have any questions.
And Jill, I appreciate your going through that because I think it does a pretty good job of showing that the city has a multi-pronged approach between prevention with especially weed abatement, with the kind of the pre-actions taken with making sure that there's those fire roads in the perimeter, the construction, and then those roads make it easy if we get, or easier, if we get to the point where we actually have to do work to knock the fires down. It's easier to actually get in, and the crews are at much less risk because of the quality of access they have and the reduced fuels when they get to where they have to put those fires down. So I know my perspective, I'm very happy to see what you have shown there. Do I have questions or comments from any of the other commissioners at this point?
I have a question.
Commissioner Aldrich, go ahead.
Yes. If one lives next to an agricultural field that butts up to a subdivision, and the crops that they grow in the agricultural field are allowed to completely dry out before they are harvested, there's no access road between the crops and the subdivision. How is that handled?
So the exception to this is agricultural growth. And so obviously our farmers need to follow their process. But typically with those, if you do look at the perimeter, they do have a buffer. Most of our ag property here does have a buffer, and that buffer is required to be abated of the weeds. And again, most of these areas, I can think of one subdivision that is right next to an area that is ag. And that particular parcel actually falls within the county, but it's a city residential subdivision right next to it. So what I do is I call the Vacaville Fire Protection District, and I work with their fire marshal there to make sure that those weeds are cut at least 30 feet along the perimeter of those fences to provide a small fire break in case something does happen with the crops in those locations.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Then I'm going to go to our public attendees. I see somebody with a phone number that ends in 211 with their hand raised. So go ahead, unmute yourself, and make your comments or ask your question. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Alicia Minion, and thank you for the presentation. And I have some questions and then some comments. So on the slide with the fire hazard severity zone, that Jill, you mentioned is dated 2017. You know, what's the likelihood that the CAL FIRE will revisit those ratings and adjust them upward in light of the LNU complex fire? I saw that Pleasant Valley Road resides in moderate rating and high rating. Lagoon Valley, I'm not sure where it is on the map. I don't have my glasses on, but Lagoon Valley also burned. I don't know what the rating is. So I was just, you know, one of the reasons why I'm like really interested in this subject is I've been kind of following what other cities do with regard to wildfire preparedness, and like the town of Portola Valley, they actually created an ad hoc committee and it's staffed with, you know, residents and stakeholders, because in that particular town, and I'm sure it's a similar issue in parts of Vacaville, especially near open space, is the residents were being canceled by their fire insurance providers. It was so bad that many residents have to seek insurance either from insurers of last resort, like Lloyd's of London, or seek concierge fire coverage, like from AIG. The premiums range from $12,000 to $15,000 a year. So the ad hoc committee was created, and they came up with some really good recommendations. I think what you have, Jill, is a really good start. But I think because I'm sure you're aware, the fire risk is going to kind of seems like here to stay. You know, we've had fires every year. They come closer and closer, and this was just really horrible. And so in addition to some of the recommendations you made, this particular wildfire committee in the town of Portola Valley, they recommended actually really making a mandate on new construction, you know, banning all combustible roofing materials, requiring ember-resistant vents, no wood decks, nothing, any decks, nothing or fences from any combustible materials, including non-combustible siding, requiring enclosed eaves. And they broke out kind of what should we do in the short term, what should we do in the midterm, what should we do in the long term. And long term, and midterm, you know, they actually recommended, you know, updating their design guidelines. In several ways. And I'm happy to send this to the commission because it goes on and on. But I think it's important because, you know, we're building still near open spaces. On city council. There was a consent item where, you know, phase 3 in Cheyenne is going to be built, and it's right up against that ridge. And I just think it's irresponsible at this point to continue building right next to open space, especially when these structures, these homes could become completely uninsurable. We don't know what the fallout's going to be, you know, with regard to the LNU complex fire.
Yes? We do try and keep comments limited to about 3 minutes. You're at 3.5. So if you could just kind of focus and wrap up fairly quickly. And I do want to make sure that staff has a chance to respond to this. So if you could wrap up quickly.
Okay, thank you. But I think we need a committee, and I think it'd be important to just let's see what went wrong. How can we improve? You know, what improvements can we make so that we can avoid the situation that we had in August? And I'll send you an email with the information that I've gathered too. Thank you.
Great. And if you would make sure that is sent to the community development website or email address as well as the fire, that way the commission can see it. Jill, would you or the chief or anybody from staff like to talk about those issues that were brought up, including any update of the fire maps?
So go ahead, boss.
Bill, I will handle this one. Good evening, commissioners. This is Chris Concepcion, the fire chief, and listening to Ms. Minion's questions and concerns. The first one regarding, is there any chance that CAL FIRE is going to revisit their fire severity zones? That's something that they look at on a regular basis. I don't know how many years in between, but they do look at that on a pretty regular basis. So can it change? Yes, it can. And that is not within our control. That is on CAL FIRE's. So what we do have under our control is to do the best that we can as far as weed abatement and making sure that any new development has the required defensible space that is required and that we feel is safe. And as you saw in Jill's presentation, the requirements of the city of Vacaville are actually more restrictive than the states, and that's on purpose because we want to make sure that we're safe. With regard to the question about I'm not going to argue with Ms. Minion, but her comment about the fact that it's irresponsible to build the phase 3 of Rogers Ranch, that was approved quite a bit ago, and the item that was before the council was just an agreement for an easement for fire buffer zones so that we can ensure that the defensible space is there. So, and as far as insurance getting canceled within the city or outside as well, within the city is what we're concerned about. We don't have any control over that. That is strictly under the control of the insurance companies. And the best that we can do and what we do have under our control is to make sure that any new development is built to the safest standards with fires and defensible space in mind, and making sure that our weed abatement program is as aggressive as ours is.
Thanks, Chief. I'm going to ask if there's any other members of the community who wish to raise their hand and identify themselves and speak on this item. And I don't see any other hands coming up. Chief, one of the things that I'll mention real quick is at our last Planning Commission meeting, we talked a little bit about when we see the capital improvement program come to us next time from the Public Works Department. It might be a time to look at the roadways that were used for evacuations and whether any of those that had, for example, substantial backup during the last set of fires are on the list for widening, and if that should affect the timing at all. I know we had two members from the public that spoke on business from the floor tonight that also asked questions about evacuation. Is there anything that you want to talk about as far as the adequacy of our evacuation routes and planning, or is that something that you think would be good maybe for a later date under the CIP? Anything you want to talk about now or bring up later?
I think we could probably take it up later, but I do want to say that that is something that we look at. And then especially with regard to the LNU Lightning Complex fire, that was an unprecedented event where severe fire hit the city not once, but 3 times over the course of about 12 hours. And it proved that our weed abatement program worked. But one of the things that we do need to look at, I was out and about and noticed that there was quite a bit of traffic and that's to be expected as far as when you have 7,000 homes being evacuated at some points in the during the evacuation. So definitely we're having staff along with the other fire departments in the county and CAL FIRE. We're doing a hot wash of this incident, and we're taking a look to see how not just as far as the evacuation zones, if they're adequate or if they need to be improved, but we're also looking to see as far as noticing and those types of things, so that our residents may be notified of any kind of evacuations that need to take place.
Great, thank you, Chief. Again, I'll ask if any of the commissioners have comments at this point, and I see one of our public members has raised their hands. Wendy Brecken. Ms. Brecken, go ahead.
Hi, this is Wendy. I just was responding to what the chief just said. I just didn't understand. At the very end, you said are you going to be revising the evacuation plan or looking at it? Would you consider having comments or concerns from residents, because I've been walking all over District 1, I'm hearing different concerns from different areas, and I just was, and I know in District 6, in Southtown, there are people who could not evacuate because there was gridlock. So, and then I guess the second part of that question is, if we continue to build at the rate we've been building, how is that going to impact the gridlock or the ability to evacuate? And can you maybe consider evacuating based on, instead of 7,000 homes at once, for example, maybe a third of that at a time or something like that? Thank you, and thank you for answering.
And Chief, before you jump in, one of the things is, I think that while the roadway adequacy is something that goes into subdivision planning, some of the things on noticing and phasing are outside of the purview of the commission. And since our agenda really is on the hazards, I may have taken us a little bit off of what's on the agenda. So let's see if we can get a quick focus, but it does sound like this is something of some concern, maybe not strictly for the commission. So I'll ask you to kind of get us wrapped up here.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to answer the first question is we're always open to comments from the public, and we're always constantly looking at our emergency planning and revising them as needed. Obviously, as you mentioned, Chair, that's under emergency planning and probably not under the purview of community development, but that we constantly look at all those things, and as far as new development, when new development does go in, those are as far as access and evacuation zones are definitely items that we look at and make sure that all the requirements are in place.
Thanks, Chief. Since I don't see any other hands, either from public or commission members raised at this point, we're going to close up presentation 7B and move on to the business. We have 3 business items: the development code, the specific plan, prototypes, and then the traffic impact notice of first the supplemental EIR, and that's a long title, so I'll come to that at the time. Our first item, 8A, is Land Use and Development Code Update, Review of Public Comments. And our agenda lists Mr. Bavand as the presenter on that. Whoever from staff, go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Chair McCauley. This is Fred Bouderi, the acting director. I'll just give a brief update on this item. So we do not have any presentation prepared for you this evening on this item. What we wanted to do was provide the commissioners with a look back at some of the public comment issues that were raised as we began to figure out how to design the proposed draft code. And in the report you have before you, we have provided you with copies of the text of comments sent to us during some of our workshops, sent into us at different times during the review process by members of the public who have a particular interest or interests in code provisions, and where possible, identifying for your use where in the draft code document the particular section that the person has asked about is addressed. And so you'll see those comments listed in the staff report. Anyone listening and watching the meeting would be able to go to the staff report and review some of those questions that have been raised during the code update process to see how, to see where they might go into the draft code and see how a particular item is addressed. We also included a longer attachment without the individual responses that list for readers all of the items and topics that were brought up during the consultant team's initial focus group meetings on the code update. And they met with groups of builders, of real estate interests, of citizens with an interest in the community and its development process, with a wide range of interested parties. And so the second part of the attachment in your report lists those topics again and provides you with that ability to take a look at and kind of go back and see how some of those items were addressed for the city staff over the last 18 months. And those topics would be addressed throughout the code documents. You can see on the screen now the homepage to the Vacaville Code Update website. And if parties go to that website, there is a link on the front page that would allow you to go directly to the current draft, public review draft code and look at the entire document. So it's really all we wanted to do was bring these items back so the commissioners had perhaps an easier guide to some of the items that have been brought up over time and give you a chance to check our work on that. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and that does conclude our comments.
Thank you, Ms. Videri. Do I have questions or comments from any members of the commission? Again, I'm not seeing any hands raised on that. While this is a business item and we don't have a formal action to take, we do always allow the public to participate if they'd like. Would any members of any of our public attendees like to comment on this item? I see no one raising their hand on that. So the recommended action listed in the agenda is to receive the update and provide comments and direction to staff. At this point, I see no comments or other direction to staff. And so I'm not going to try and interpose any on my own. We don't have any additional comments at tonight's meeting on this. Thank you, Mr. Videri.
Thank you.
Item number 8B is the downtown specific plan, draft residential and mixed use development prototypes, and the staff contact is listed as Tyra Hayes. Ms. Hayes, you may proceed.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the Commission. As noted, my name is Tyra Hayes. I'm a senior planner with the city's Advanced Planning Department. Tonight's item is an informational item talking about the latest status of our downtown specific plan. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on the draft residential and mixed-use development prototypes. But before I go into what those are and why we're doing this, I'd like to take just a moment or two to kind of bring people up to speed in terms of why we are preparing the downtown specific plan and what we have done to date. Next slide, please. So the city started the downtown specific plan process in 2019. It is a tier process expected to conclude in May of next year. The main goal of the downtown specific plan is to identify various improvements that will help facilitate economic development and create an experiential destination for Vacaville residents and visitors alike. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we began this process in 2019, and a lot has occurred since that time. Earlier this year, we completed what we call our downtown connectivity and streetscape design plan. Essentially, what this plan does is identify ways that we can improve both pedestrian and bicycle facilities downtown while also encouraging transit ridership. This specific document also is related to the next item on tonight's agenda. It's the vehicular miles traveled requirements that the state has imposed on all California cities. In this case, what we're trying to do is reduce the number of miles that people are driving to and from their destinations in their vehicles. So thus, we are trying to increase the experience that both pedestrians, bicyclists, and transit riders have on a daily basis. Now we are currently at the tail end of the second phase of the downtown specific plan, and that phase is the evaluation and strategy document. I'll talk about more of that in just a moment. And lastly, as I previously noted, we are hoping to conclude the downtown specific plan and get it ready for its adoption hearing in May of 2021. Next slide, please. So we've been quite busy. That said, there are still several steps that need to be taken before we can complete our downtown specific plan. I'll explain why you're looking at ingredients on your slide in just one moment. So as we're going to discuss as we move forward with this presentation, we are currently working on the design requirements and guidelines for all developments located within the downtown specific planning area. We're also updating the city's existing historic Main Street design requirements document. And we're going to be working on a safety strategy. Now, the safety strategy should not be confused with any kind of plan that addresses wildland fires. This safety strategy is really focusing on pedestrian and customer safety as they travel to and from their destinations within downtown. Next slide, please. Today, we've completed quite a few documents, all of which are available on the city's public outreach website, letstalkvacaville.com. What we've done is we've completed these documents and we have placed them on the previously mentioned website. Many of these have been shared with our planning commission, and we will continue this process as we finish the process. We have completed what we call our existing conditions analysis. That's our PDA profile. That's simply taking inventory of what currently exists within the downtown today. We finished our downtown connectivity and streetscape design plan, which I previously discussed. We did an analysis on creating a permanent farmers market downtown. We've done analysis in terms of addressing both affordable housing and any anti-displacement policies that the city may have. We most recently concluded our parking analysis and policy strategy. That was most recently discussed with our planning commission 2 months ago. And we also completed what we call our retail strategy. This document is very important as we continue our discussion tonight, because this is the document that has led us to the creation of our residential and mixed-use development prototypes. Next. Oh, I'm sorry. Before I go on, I wanted to note the reason I had a picture of ingredients on the previous slide is it's really important that everyone understand that these documents are not to be viewed as chapters of the downtown specific plan. Instead, they should be viewed as ingredients. So using these ingredients and mixing them up in different ways, we are creating the final product, which will be the complete comprehensive downtown specific plan. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the retail strategy is really the document that has fed us into the task at hand tonight, and that was the creation of the draft prototype that we're about to review in just a moment. The main goal of the retail strategy, which was created by the economists on our consultant development team, was to find ways to help facilitate economic revitalization within downtown, enhance the amount, variety, and quality of retail and other non-residential uses downtown, and to create what's called an 18-hour downtown. What that really means is we want to have a vibrant downtown all hours of the day. We would like to have a downtown that remains open after 5 p.m. One way we can do such a thing is to provide additional housing units downtown, thus creating a regular and consistent customer base for the restaurants and retailers downtown. Next slide, please. So in addition to what we're about to discuss about the prototypes, I do want to let everyone know, in case this is the first time you're hearing about the retail strategy, this document includes a wide range of recommendations on how we can best encourage economic revitalization of downtown. Some of those recommendations include the streetscape improvements that have been identified in our downtown connectivity and streetscape design plan. It talks about ways that we can reactivate our ground floor retail. It recommends that we consider helping small businesses start up new businesses within downtown. And it talks about incentivizing new development while also prioritizing new housing projects. This is how we have gotten to tonight's topic, draft residential and mixed-use development prototype. Next slide, please. So tonight we're going to be talking about 4 different prototypes as it relates to both residential and mixed-use development. But first, I want to tell you why we've created these prototypes and what that really means. So through the creation of these prototypes, what the city is attempting to do is we're trying to provide different types of development form that we would like to see within our downtown. We want them to be consistent with the vision that we have moving forward with the downtown specific plan. We also want to provide clarity for developers who are interested in developing downtown. This not only helps their process, but hopefully it's also going to help the city create a more streamlined entitlement process for new development applications. So in terms of our prototypes, we've really chosen to focus on creating prototypes for multifamily dwellings, townhomes, neighborhood multiplexes, and downtown mixed use. Each of these we're going to be discussing with examples in just a moment. Next slide, please. So the first of our prototypes is our multifamily dwelling. Another way to consider what this is think of either a very small apartment building, or you can also think of a very large home that has been broken down to smaller residential units. We do have examples of this occurring within our downtown currently. So a downtown multifamily dwelling is a building or a grouping of buildings that contain multiple attached units. Usually these are done in a stacked configuration. So you have one unit on the bottom floor, one on the top floor. However, there are other configurations that can be considered. Now, the examples you see on the slide tonight are simply that. They're examples. This is not something that we've approved. We have not approved any type of prototype. These are just things that we are considering. And the whole purpose of tonight's meeting is to get comments from our planning commissioners as well as the public in terms of what they would like to see downtown and whether or not the ideas and the draft prototypes that we are presenting here tonight fits in with your vision for downtown. Next slide, please. With each of the various prototypes, we've come up with draft areas where we think it might be most appropriate for these types of prototypes. But just like the prototypes themselves, everything you're seeing here tonight is in draft form. Nothing has been vetted. Nothing has been chosen as of yet. These are just some of our initial ideas as to where we could potentially see these prototypes being developed sometime in the future. I should note that none of these prototypes are intended to replace existing uses. Existing uses will still be permitted. The prototypes being proposed tonight are just for those areas people are thinking to either redevelop or perhaps develop on existing vacant property. In the case of the multifamily dwelling, we thought it might be appropriate to allow these on the south side of Stevenson as it cuts over from Merchant Street to Davis Street. And there was some consideration given to a small area just north of East Monte Vista Avenue. Next slide, please. The next prototype for your consideration is the townhome/row home prototype. Now, most people know what this is, but for anyone who isn't familiar with it, this is typically seen as a series of attached or detached dwellings that are placed side by side. Next slide, please. So just like we had done with the previous prototype, we have taken our first draft of where we think this type of development might be most appropriate. One thing I would like to note, we do have an example of fairly recently constructed townhomes within the city of Vacaville. The photo you see on the slide before you is a photo of Morgan Park Apartments. Now, while these units were built as apartments, I would like to note that the units that are facing Harbison Drive were constructed as townhomes. These are units that have been built side by side. This is something that we would like to consider for our downtown. Just as with the townhomes, all the prototypes being shown tonight can be either for sale or for rental, and my guess is we'll probably get a mixture of both. Next slide, please. The third type of prototype for your consideration tonight is what we're calling our neighborhood multiplex. This is typically a smaller scale development. And we foresee these probably occurring in areas that will be designated for either low or medium density areas. So this is yet another example, but at a smaller scale, of a large existing home being subdivided into smaller residential units, or it can simply just be a small scale apartment complex. Next slide, please. The photo you see on your slide before you is an example of such a development already in existence within our downtown. This is the Boyd Street Apartments. This development was built in the early 2000s and consists of 6 units. The neighborhood surrounding it is primarily single-family, single-story homes. In this case, our first stab at identifying areas where this may be most appropriate included areas along West Street, as well as areas south of Stevenson Street, which is where the existing Boyd Street apartments are currently located. Next slide, please. So the last of our prototypes for your consideration tonight includes our downtown mixed-use prototype. Now, this type of development would not likely be seen in areas that are primarily residential as they currently exist. This type of use will more than likely be seen along our major arterials, such as East Monte Vista Avenue or perhaps Davis Street. In this case, a downtown mixed-use building typically includes a non-residential use on the bottom floor, something typically including a store, an office, or a different type of service-related use, with residential units located on top of that use. Next slide, please. Just like the 2 previous prototypes, I do want to note that the city does have a small example of mixed-use development within downtown. Probably the most notable example of mixed use is the existing Vasquez Deli, which is located on East Main Street. On the bottom floor of the building shown on your screen right now, we have a Mexican restaurant with 3 residential apartments located on the top floor. We also have an additional mixed-use building on Main Street above the Bartlow Jewelry Store. You have the jewelry store on the first floor, and I believe it's 2, perhaps 3 apartments on the second story. While never constructed, we did have an approval for a similar mixed-use building right next door to the Bartlow Jewelers. If someone were to come in today, we would like to include enough information in our downtown specific plan to allow a property owner and or developer create those additional units on the second floor with minimum time for review and approval. And as I mentioned, downtown uses will probably not be seen, and I would not expect them to be seen in existing residential neighborhoods. These are the areas we expect to see higher volumes of traffic, and thus are likely to be located along our arterial and or collector street. Next slide, please. So on this map, we thought it might be interesting to see what would happen if we combined all the areas being considered for these various prototypes on one map. As you can see, if we were to include all the areas being considered, it covers a large portion of downtown, and this is something that we would also be interested in knowing the Planning Commission and the Planning Commission and the public's thoughts on. One thing that is being considered is, should we make housing allowed by right throughout the entirety of downtown? Next slide, please. So before I ask for any comments and or ask the planning commissioners to raise any questions that they may have, I would like to note that it is our goal throughout the duration of the remaining schedule of the downtown specific plan to come back to the planning commission with as many draft documents as possible in order to help facilitate the downtown specific plan's final review later next year. With that said, I'm hoping to be able to come back to the Planning Commission next month with the draft safety plan. That plan is likely to include a lot of recommendations as it pertains to signage, lighting, and perhaps security cameras. And then in December, I would like to be able to come back to the Planning Commission with our draft design and development standards, which will be influenced by the final prototypes that we will be evaluating as part of the downtown specific plan. For anyone not familiar with what development requirements are, development requirements can address everything from how far a building is set back from a property line to the maximum height a building can be, to the parking requirements for that use, to identifying what the preferred materials and or architecture is. Next slide. Oh, actually, this is our last slide. So I know I've given you a lot of information to consider. This is a business item, so I do welcome any questions and comments anyone may have, and I will do my best to be able to address them either tonight or I will bring answers back to you at a future Planning Commission meeting. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
So Tyra, I want to make sure I understand properly what you're asking from the commission tonight. You'd like us, for example, if we look at what you've thrown up and just to grab some stuff, say, oh, I really like the prototype you show as a row house. I can see that helping. The mixed use sounds like a good idea, but it's a little harder to imagine that happening. I think the row houses work well here. I think we should encourage that. Other types, I'm not, that's kind of, yeah, that's about how I see something in the working in the downtown. Go ahead and advance that into the plan. Is that the sort of generic sort of commentary that you're after from us?
Absolutely.
Okay, so now that I have a better idea of what you're asking from us, I'm going to go to any of my fellow commissioners then and ask them, based on what you've seen in the discussion of the prototypes, and we will give an opportunity for public comment later, but since the staff is asking for commission comments and direction right now, I'd like to ask if any of the commissioners have comments. And Commissioner Aldrich raised her hand, not virtually, but in person. So I'll go ahead and turn things over to Jan at the beginning. Go ahead.
Hi, I have a question. I can't remember how long ago it was that we had a pretty comprehensive downtown development plan in front of us. We had different types of housing, of course, mixed use and so on. Was that not true, Tyra?
It wasn't done as part of this program, but there was a previous downtown specific plan adopted. I believe it was in the late 80s.
Oh, I didn't think it was then. I thought it was within the last 5 years.
Unfortunately, nothing's come to mind.
We had businesses planned for the old Vasquez Deli location. Sonoma Brewing was to have gone in there, as was Backdoor Bistro was to have gone in there. I went to a downtown house where all those people had sample places set up so we could see how the layout was going to be. Do you remember that?
I don't, but I'm wondering if you're inquiring about the East Main project.
Yes,
that was
I believe that was it.
Yes, the East Main.
That's gone?
No, actually, it is still entitled, and there are current discussions to reactivate that project. And for anyone familiar with East Main, that project does include components of a lot of the prototypes we've discussed tonight, including row homes, mixed use, and I believe we have attached single family homes.
Yes, I remember that it did have a lot of these same elements. Okay, that's my question.
So,
thank you.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Aldrich. Do any of the other commissioners have questions, comments, things they liked for what they've seen, things they don't? Nope, not seen any hands coming up. I'd come back to give an opportunity, but at this time I am going to go out to the public. I see Alicia Minion has her hand raised on Zoom. So go ahead and unmute yourself. We'd like to hear your comments.
Hi, it's Alicia Minion. Thank you for the presentation. It's really well done. I liked a lot of the pictures. But I'm sorry I haven't commented on the downtown specific plan before. I know you've come up with some ideas in the past, but and so I have a question. I was wondering when coming up with some of the ideas like the row homes and the mixed use, where you see the retail on the bottom, housing on the top, some of the apartments seemed nice. It kind of blended in with mixed use, not too tall. And I was just wondering, did you look out at other cities and their downtowns? I really like Los Gatos, Palo Alto, Pacific Beach, and San Diego, Winters, some aspects of Walnut Creek. I'm just wondering, where some of the architectural facades and some of the types of buildings you see in cute downtowns that really are attractive and have character. I was just wondering kind of where some of the ideas came. And then I was wondering too, normally, I'm assuming there's going to be a main attraction and the parking would eventually be an issue. I was wondering if you're considering underground parking. I know Los Gatos did underground parking. It's very helpful. That way people can just park underground and then they can walk several streets. Also, I was wondering what kind of development incentives or developer incentive programs are kind of you're thinking of to make once the plan is formalized and finalized. What kind of development incentive ideas are kind of being tossed around to make this a reality? And I was wondering too, at any point, will there be a survey to the public about design? And many cities, I know I've said this in the past, many cities have architectural review committees that are very helpful when creating, a large project like a downtown. And, maybe that's something that we could consider. So it's not entirely internal, and then you could present your work to an architectural committee made up of residents and others with that type of expertise. So we have some uniformity and the character of the downtown specific plan. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay. Pyre, you want to address any of those?
Yes, I do. So I hope I got them all. And if I overlook something, please let me know. So we've got our ideas from a lot of different sources. City staff has visited several fairly local downtowns, including Winters, Walnut Creek, Livermore, Napa, my goodness, Nevada City, a bunch of them, Petaluma. So we have gone and looked for ourselves to see what we like and what works. We have reviewed numerous downtown-specific plans from neighboring and regional cities. We also rely heavily on our consultant team, which has done similar plans throughout the state. I do want to make sure it's clear that everything we showed you tonight is just an example. This isn't necessarily something we are proposing exactly as shown. It was just to give a general idea of what's being considered at this point in time. Let's see, parking. We are definitely looking into parking. As the Planning Commission can attest, we've had two very in-depth discussions about parking downtown. The downtown parking study and the downtown parking strategy document, both of them are located and available on our Let's Talk Vacaville website. If you haven't done so already, I highly recommend you take a look at it. At this point in time, we are not considering underground parking only because we do have sensitive cultural resources in downtown, especially along the areas near the creek. That said, we are looking into other forms of parking, including podium parking. This is something that would allow for a higher density development while still providing adequate parking. Development incentives, that is something that we are currently working on. We're very early in the process, so we haven't figured it all out. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is once we have a general idea in terms of which direction we're going on our prototype, the economist on our consultant team is going to be looking into the economic feasibility of these different prototypes being developed downtown. Not only are they going to be looking at how much it costs to develop these types of uses, but they're also going to be looking at the city's existing fee structure. So with that said, there are some incentives that are a possibility. Some of the things that we are looking into would be potentially reducing fees. We might be looking into fee deferral, and that would mean instead of paying those fees at the time of building permit application, they'd be paying it at the time that they occupy the building. We definitely know we want to provide a more streamlined entitlement process for the developers. so that they can get their financing in order with a certain level of certainty in terms of how long it's going to take them to get their building permits. There are some others, but unfortunately they escape me at this point in time. That is something that we are more than...
Because development incentive is a little bit outside what the Planning Commission can approve. So it's okay to skip over that.
Okay, thank you. And then I hadn't thought about doing a survey to the public. However, one thing that we are always open to doing is doing additional virtual town hall meetings with the public. If there's interest in that, by all means, I will do that gladly. We hadn't given any thought to the Architectural Review Committee. That's something I would actually have to check into, and perhaps that's something we can consider further as part of the virtual town hall meeting. I think that was all the questions posed.
All right, thank you. I see Wendy Brecken has her hand raised. So Ms. Brecken, you can go ahead, unmute yourself and make your comment or ask your question.
Hi, thank you. I think you've done a great job presenting, and I like the picture where there's the mixed use picture, and it looks like it's a real vibrant downtown and people would want to be attracted there. I mean, that's my concern, is that, you know, too many apartment buildings and it's going to be a dead zone. We want to, you know, have it be a cool place that everybody wants to go, like the Winters outside area where, you know, all the restaurants are, and, you know, to create, I think the architecture is huge as far as making it cool, making it a place that people would want to go and play and have fun. And so I kind of like the idea of the architectural committee or whatever with the citizens and staff and what have you. So that's it. That's my comment. And I appreciate what you've done.
Thank you.
I don't see any other members of the public, so I am going to go back to the commission. I guess, Tyra, I'll start things off with a couple of comments. Maybe this will generate something else. As I look through these, I really love the idea of the mixed use. And as Ms. Brecken said, you know, the idea of you get people there, they're active, the 18-hour town. I would love to see the East Main Street project go forward. I don't know, even under the current economy, that we generate the sort of rents for the residential or commercial use in a mixed use that pay for the higher cost you get from those mixed uses. And I think if we really want to get residences downtown, we should put more of our emphasis on the multifamily and the row houses as the sort of thing that can have, as was said, the cool design. They look good, they get people want to go there, but they have a cost that's reasonable that then makes it a good investment. So those are the two that I would think we would most want to focus on, and that we would want to make sure that we have them in, you know, in a sufficient density to make it viable. We have, with those different types, a good variety of incomes that we can accommodate, so that we have all sorts of people that are in the downtown area that supports all sorts of businesses. I think that's the sort of mix of the multifamily and row house with a lot of different income ranges that are covered that will then support the retail and the safety strategy and a more vigorous downtown. So that's my view. Again, I'd really like to see any other commissioners jump in and let us know what your thoughts are on that. Anyone?
Perhaps it will help if we go back to slide 17.
And I don't mind going back, but well, I'll ask that a couple of times. I'm not going to try and force if the other commissioners don't have Vice Chair Fortney's hand is up. So Mr. Fortney, go ahead.
Yeah, Tyra, thank you for the presentation. Absolutely on the right track. Looking forward to next month's meeting. You finished your presentation with having or opening a discussion on the residential right to residential down there. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Okay. It's a bit of a complicated topic, but to put it in simple terms, Right now, if someone were to propose new residential development downtown, more than likely they're going to be subject to a higher level of discretionary review, requiring the Planning Commission's action and or the council's action. Whenever we require a developer to obtain the approval from Planning Commission or Council, that adds a level of uncertainty to their schedule, thus affecting their ability to get financing. One of the things that we would like to do is make this process easier for the developer so that they can acquire financing for this project and get it built in a reasonable time frame. So under that idea, what we are considering is allowing housing as a permitted use versus a use that's subject to a higher level of discretionary review. So instead of going to the Planning Commission or the Council, perhaps someone, if they're consistent with the development and design criteria identified in the downtown specific plan, they would simply be subject to the Planning Director's approval. In some cases, perhaps we can just stop it at the Planning Commission level of approval, depending on the size of the project. But we definitely want to reduce the amount of time it takes the developer to submit their application and finally receive their building permit.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for the explanation. When will we have this discussion? Will this be coming up next month with your presentation?
I believe I could do that. We are currently working on that as we speak.
Okay. I look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other commissioners?
I want to ask her a question.
Commissioner Aldrich, go ahead.
Tyra, it's Jan. If you're going to bring it back next month, can you bring back that East Main plan that we had whenever it was, 3 or 4 years ago?
Perhaps Acting Director Buderi can answer that one.
Well, what we could, this is Fred Buderi. What we could do certainly is bring back a view of the approved plan. So that might also help the commissioners visualize how the East Main project fits into the direction that Tyra has described here this evening. So yes, we could.
If we were in person, you could see Commissioner Aldrich nodding her head of yes, that's what she meant. So.
And Chair McCauley was also nodding his head. If you could see him in person. Yes, that would be perfect because I have kind of forgotten how it looked, but I know I liked it. So.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Fortney, your hand is still raised. Are you done or something else?
Nope, my apologies. I'll take my hand down.
Okay. Always happy to be waved at. Anybody else before we close up on this one? Okay, staff, thank you for your presentation on that. We'll now go on to item 8C, which is a notice of preparation of a supplemental environmental impact report for the general plan transportation element and the energy and conservation strategy update project. I will note that there are more 3- and 4-letter initials on the front page of this staff report than in the rest of the entire packet combined. This is, just before staff starts, one of those where it seemed like it's such an esoteric thing about talking about the modeling for an environmental review, getting in a traffic impact level of service. And yet when I look at what could have a real long-term impact on how we do business in Vacaville and how we analyze projects, this may be the most significant thing we look at this evening. So with that as an introduction, I will turn it over to whomever from staff is the lead on this discussion.
Hello, Chairman McCauley. It's Tyra Hayes again. I will be doing the introduction to tonight's item. So to preface tonight's item, I wanted to let the Planning Commission know that the Community Development Department has paired up with the Public Works Traffic Division, as well as a consultant from the Environmental Consulting Group, DUDEC, as well as a transportation consulting group known as Fair & Peers, to bring tonight's item to you. So tonight, the goal is to receive comments from the Planning Commission and the public in regards to what should be considered as part of the project that will be explained to you tonight. and to let us know what we need to consider and analyze in what we are calling our Supplemental Environmental Impact Report. So here to explain what a scoping meeting is and why we're here tonight, as well as to explain the two projects that will be evaluated as part of the supplemental EIR, is Brian Bradtidge of DUDEC. Brian?
Thank you, Tyra, and good evening, commissioners and participants there on the phone and on the internet. I'm going to briefly explain, as the chairperson just said, there's a lot of acronyms in here, and it can be kind of esoteric stuff. So I'm going to just in 4 or 5 minutes, or hopefully less, break down what it is that we're hoping to accomplish tonight and how this environmental review process is overlapping on the general plan update and the energy and conservation action strategy update. And then a couple other team members, John Gard and Rose Newberry, are going to address the specifics of those two update processes, and then we'll get into some hopefully good discussion with the commission and comments from the public. So if we can go to the next slide, and that's what we're lining up. We're going to go through these topics and then get to the good part there, the public comment. If we can go to the next slide, and one more. All right, the first acronym, and many of you have been through projects with CEQA review, but I just wanted to point that out first. CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act, and it requires all agencies subject to the jurisdiction of California, so that's state agencies, cities, counties, special districts, school districts, to evaluate the environmental implications of their actions. And that includes planning actions like this. It's not just approving people to build things. Next slide, please. And more specifically, CEQA has 4 objectives, which is to inform decision makers and the public about potential environmental effects, identify ways to avoid or reduce environmental damage, to prevent environmental damage by requiring implementation of feasible alternatives or mitigation measures, and lastly, to disclose to the public regions for approval of projects that do in fact have significant impacts that cannot be completely avoided. Next slide, please. And what is an EIR? An EIR is an environmental impact report, and it's kind of been called the heart of CEQA because it's the most review you can do under the CEQA process, and it's a detailed informational document that analyzes a project's potentially significant effects on the environment and also identifies measures and alternatives that, again, could avoid or substantially reduce those effects. Next slide, please. And what is our project? Because CEQA applies to projects. Well, it's this update process of the general plan and the ECAS, Energy and Conservation Action Strategy, which is an implementation component of the general plan. And as I mentioned, CEQA does apply to planning actions. And the general plan update back in 2015 did certify, or an EIR was certified for that process back in August 2015. So what we're doing is we're supplementing that EIR. We're not starting from scratch because CEQA allows us to prepare what's called a supplement to the EIR when there are only minor changes necessary. And in this case, we're looking at updating the ECAS, revising the transportation element to incorporate VMT, and we'll discuss in a minute what that means for the city. And that really is keeping everything else steady state, right? We're not going into other policies. We're not going into the land use classification. So that means we're really looking at impacts focused on transportation and GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, because those are primarily driven by transportation effects. So when we're looking at transportation, it makes sense to update the ECAS, which was envisioned on a 5-year cycle anyway to update, and we're on that cycle. So things kind of lined up there. Next slide, please. And so here's the actual process of preparing that supplemental EIR. Right now we're in what's called scoping. Scoping is formally started by a notice. It's called a notice of preparation, which the city issued on September 28th. That starts a 30-day process where we gather input. We'll take that input, do our analysis, prepare the draft EIR, which we hope will come out. I probably should have said winter 2021. We envision that document to come out after Christmas. We won't ruin anyone's holidays with an EIR reading. And then in the spring, we would go to certification of that EIR and then approval of those updates. Next slide. And just to sum up, the scoping process is to solicit comments from other agencies that have jurisdiction over transportation or energy usage in this case, and the general public as to what should be in the EIR, what potential impacts the plan can result in, and mitigation measures or alternatives that should be looked at to avoid those impacts. So what the scoping process is not is it's not a look into the merits of the project itself. That will come later. Right now, what we're doing is really preparing the environmental ledger. So when it's time to consider this update, we have the potential environmental effects identified and disclosed. All right, next slide. And here I'm going to turn it over to John Gard from Farron Piers. He's going to explain a little bit what this switch to vehicle miles traveled, VMT, is and what it means for the transportation element.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. Again, I'm John Gard with Farron Piers, and I'm going to spend the next couple minutes providing the Commission a brief overview of what VMT is. I could probably spend an hour or two on it, but I'm going to keep it very, very high level. VMT by definition is a vehicle driven 1 mile, one VMT, 1 mile of travel by a vehicle. It's typically expressed on a daily basis. And the VMT has been in use in environmental documents for a long time, but it really became important in 2013 when Senate Bill 743, SB 743 was approved, and more recently in 2018, Public Resource Code section 21099 specified that for CEQA documents that the transportation analysis for those documents, looking at land use projects and transportation projects as well, should look at VMT instead of intersection roadway level service as the primary metric of transportation impacts. And this was done purposely for 3 reasons. One is to better align the state goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, encouraging infill development, just like the downtown specific plan that was mentioned in the prior presentation, as well as improving public health through walking and bicycling. So that's the real background behind it. 743 also entrusted the Office of Planning and Research from the state of California with providing guidance for how to implement VMT as a transportation metric. And in 2018, they issued the Technical Advisory on Evaluating Transportation Impacts, the CEQA. And this document, although it's advisory in nature, has been used by a number of agencies and practitioners and just determining how VMT should be evaluated in CEQA. And it's the primary metric used now. And if you look at the CEQA statutes, it was required to be used, could have been used at any point when 743 was adopted, but now it's required statewide as of July 1st of this past year. Next slide. So what the OPR Technical Advisory, as well as California Air Resources Board, recommends that new development be at least 15% more transportation efficient, i.e. generating less VMT per dwelling unit, per person, per employee, or whatever, than either a local or a regional threshold. So that's the default definition. So we're basically looking to put land use in transportation efficient locations, near transit, mixed use, walkable areas, things like that. Agencies do have discretion to select their own thresholds if they have substantial evidence, which is a CEQA term we won't want to get into here. And they can choose whatever methodology they want to do that. In the case of Vacaville, like many other cities, most rely on travel demand models to do that. A little more detail than I want to provide here, but the city has a travel demand model and it's most likely to be used with this. Next, please. So the technical advisory does provide opportunities to what we call screen out projects. And by screening out, what we're talking about are projects that are presumed not to cause a significant transportation impact. And so if you plug in a project that causes a net decrease in VMT, if you add retail to a retail starved residential area, for instance, so people have to drive fewer miles, or if you put projects near major transit stops or very small projects, 110 trips a day, those are presumed less than significant. Next.
John, question on that. The second bullet is along major transit lines or high density transit corridors. Whose definition of that? Is it a local definition, a regional, a statewide? Where is that term defined?
That term is defined in the CEQA guidelines and has been interpreted by OPR in a lot of different ways. It basically means like a transit priority area or a high quality transit service means one bus every 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
That's the definition. The other opportunity for screening comes with these what we call screening maps. And to the right of what you see in this slide is a map of, this is, I believe, Western or Riverside County. And what we look for is areas that are transportation efficient, that generate less VMT per dwelling unit or person or whatever the metric is. It's an efficiency metric. And in this case, you can see there's not a whole lot of zones that are 15% below the regional threshold. But if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. This is a map showing many, many more zones, traffic analysis zones that are as good as the average overall regional total. So being 15% more efficient is a higher bar to get over, to be honest. So, but that is something that a lot of agencies use, this sort of screening map opportunity. So next, please. So there are some words of caution here, though, that VMT it's a more complicated way of trying to calculate travel, because instead of just having to figure out how many trips per day go into a driveway or go through a traffic light, we're having to figure out how far they go, which means, are they commuting to Benicia or all the way to the Bay Area or that type of thing. So, and then certain land uses like hotels and other hospitals have unique challenges as well. And I know there's a lot of discussion around VMT and mitigations for VMT impacts if you can't screen a project out based on any of the criteria I mentioned previously. So more often than not, VMT impacts are mitigated in the form of transportation demand management, TDM strategies. But some agencies, not a lot, but some have looked at other kind of more regional solutions, which we call VMT exchanges, as well as mitigation banks. It may be a little too detailed now to talk about that, but there is, as part of this EIR, there will be a lot of discussion about the types of mitigation that are needed if proposed projects do have significant VMT impacts. Next. And I'll turn it over to Rose. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, John. I'm going to talk about the ECAS, which is the Existing Energy Conservation Action Strategy. It's important here to mention that energy includes gasoline and energy for cars as well, which is why it links in. And I'm talking about why it's important and the steps. So first, the steps of the ECAS. So sorry, I just expanded my notes. So first thing we have to do is understand how much GHG there is being emitted in 2020 right now. There are current state goals for 2020. They're 1990 levels, and the existing ECAS should get the city there. So we're estimating right now, that's what we're doing. We're estimating what the emissions are right now. And then we're figuring out what the emissions are allowed to be to meet state guidance in 2030, which is 40% below 1990. Once we figure out where we need to go, we're going to do some outreach and coordination and understand both from VMT, but there are other sources, and VMT is going to be the most. Transportation emissions are likely 70% of the 2035 emissions. So that's where you're going to get your biggest bang for your buck. But we're also interested in building energy, waste and water, and understanding from Planning Commission and the public what sorts of strategies they would like to see and seem the most beneficial and align with city values that we should bring forward in the ECAS. We're then going to draft strategy development which means we have to put math to these ideas. The state wants us to prove that we're actually reducing these emissions. Thankfully, on the VMT side, a lot of that is being done for us because we understand the fuel mix. So we understand how dirty or clean the gas and electricity is that moves these cars around the city. So we can prove those reductions. And then once we show that by doing all of these things, we're going to hit the 2035 goals from the state of California, we're going to draft the final ECAS. So really, this is all being pushed by the state's reduction goals and then the GHG reduction questions in CEQA, because the project will have to prove their VMT reductions, will also need to prove separately their GHG reductions. And that's all I have.
So it sounds like that's a wrap up of the staff presentation. Nobody else from staff is jumping in. I guess that is moving it over to the commission at this point. Yeah, this is a little bit hard one to sometimes get our hands around, but I'll start asking if any of my fellow commissioners have questions about the process or what is asked of them at this time. Would any commissioners like to participate or ask questions of the staff and presenters at this time? And I don't see any hands coming up. One question I will ask for staff is, are we like the first people doing this, or has somebody walked down this road before and walked? I guess that's a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Has somebody traveled this path before and we have an idea of what others have done and the impacts of it, or are we really kind of the first ones walking into this potential minefield of transitioning from LOS to VMT?
This is Gwen Owens, and basically there are some agencies that have moved forward with regards to using VMT. They typically are larger agencies like San Francisco, LA. In our region, both Fairfield and Vallejo have adopted guidelines, but they haven't actually come up with how to mitigate their impacts. So we are not exactly cutting edge, but we are on the forefront and we are trying to figure this out like other agencies are.
So then when we're looking at a notice of preparation dealing with this, and again, I'm struggling to get my hands on this bowl of Jell-O. What we're really looking at is, are you asking us what sort of strategies you think should be considered? What sort of topics should be covered in the environmental analysis? I want to make sure we're providing the sort of direction that you need before you go into the document.
And Brian, you might want to add a little bit more, but my understanding is, the city will actually evaluate what the impacts are for VMT. Based upon the impacts, we will look at possibilities of how to mitigate the impacts and then just sort of move forward from there.
Okay. And Brian, before you do that, I see Commissioner Fortney, Vice Chair Fortney has his hand up. So I'll ask Mr. Fortney to jump in and then we'll see what other comments we have from staff and consultant. Mr. Fortney?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think you kind of summed it up when you said, let's try to get our hands around this. So to the consultants, if I'm reading this and what I understand on the VMT, we're trying to get that VMT number down on a development project. If we have a project being built in the outskirts of town or at the edge of town that has a higher VMT, would one of the options be for them to bring that VMT to put some commercial development within that residential project? Would that be helpful? Is that in the right direction?
So, yeah, go ahead, John. Thank you.
Yeah, the OPR, technical advisory talks about that, and 743 really is trying to put land use in efficient locations, and putting residential on the outskirts of a city, isn't going to be 15% more efficient than everything else on average. So whether it's putting complementary land uses, whether it's office nearby or like you mentioned, retail is one strategy, but it's It's really got to be the right mix of uses and the right type for it to work. We've learned that, unfortunately, location trumps about everything else as it relates to, VMT. Yeah. So that's, it is, a lot of agencies are dealing with it in terms of, development on the edge of the city, and the VMT picture is not great for that location.
Yeah, because I see the resident or the retail aspect being out there being problematic in the future. In regards to the mitigating, are we basically looking at, and I know you touched on mitigating a little bit, but nobody really has a solution. Are we basically, you mentioned the word bank, are we basically looking at a fee?
So one of the things that we're actually we're starting to explore with STA and the other agencies within Solano County is potentially...
And STA is whom for the public?
I'm sorry, Solano Transportation Authority. Sorry about that. Is basically what we're starting to actually discuss is to create some sort of, bank of projects that if you have a private development project or a transportation project that has a VMT impact, that you can actually buy into that and it stays within the county of Solano. So what we don't want to do in Vacaville is necessarily buy into a bank that's statewide, that we're purchasing mitigation credits that are for Southern California that don't benefit our region.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Answered my question.
Thanks. Other commissioners with questions for staff and consultant right now? Seeing none, I will go over and see if any of our public attendees wish to comment on that, and I will once again note, as was commented at the beginning of the meeting under correspondence, that we have received an email from Doug Chen at Discovery Builders that addresses this and is in the record as well, including talking about modeling and making sure that we have an open process for the discussion. Would any of our community members like to chime in at this point? I don't see any blue hands coming up, so I will come back to the commission and to the consultants. This is, it's a hard one for us to tell you what you should look at. The main thing I would say into the scoping is that we should make sure we look at all of the various options we might have, whether that is changes in how we do our road planning, how we do transit on the local and regional area, how we support things such as carpooling, how we support additional office and industrial development in Vacaville so that the residential growth in Vacaville has local job options that reduces the needs to commute. And so economic development actually as a strategy for reducing VMT is certainly one that I think we should look at in the EIR the supplemental EIR as one of the ways that we can reduce VMT, give people the option of a shorter trip. I think is one that goes well with a number of our strategies. So that's as much commentary as I have on this. Commissioner Aldridge doesn't have anything else.
I think you did it very well.
Any other commissioners want to chime in on this? Staff and consultant, anything else you need from us before we wrap this up?
Chairman McCauley, this is Tyra Hayes. I just want to kind of wrap this up from the consultant side by saying and reminding everyone that the public comment period on the notice of preparation for the supplemental EIR is still open and will remain open until October 28th, should someone have additional ideas after this meeting. And it is our intention to bring the amended general plan transportation elements, the updated energy conservation and action strategy plan back to the Planning Commission and eventually the Council in May of next year. And at the same time, we're hoping to certify the supplemental EIR.
Tyra, as you go through this process, keep us informed, because right now you don't have many comments because there's not something very specific. As you start to get into specifics, you will get, I would expect, a lot more reaction. So feel free to bring this back as it's going through the process and check in with us for mid-course advice. And I do see Commissioner Alan Johnson's hand is up. Go ahead, Commissioner Johnson. Alan, you're still muted.
All right, how about now?
I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Perfect. Tyra just mentioned that the public comment period ends October 28th, but in the package as attachment 1, I see a notice that it ends October 27th. So just a clarification there.
We did note an inconsistency between the staff report and the notice of preparation notice. So we're going to give the benefit to the later date. So we will accept comments until October 28th.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyra.
Commission, this is Fred Buderi. I'll just add that the location to send comments to is on the notice of preparation that's attached to the staff report. The information about the project can also be found on the city website in the Community Development Department as well. So anyone wishing to read the notice in more detail, go to the Planning Commission's agenda for tonight, and the notice is in there, or alternately on the city website.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Buderi. And seeing no more blue hands, I'm going to go ahead and close item 8C. We'll move on to item number 9, which is status reports on development and major projects. 9A is current planning.
Good evening, Planning Commission. This is Albert Enold, Associate Planner with the Current Planning Division, and I'll be here to give you an update about what kind of activity we had during the month of September. I'll start with applications that we received during September. One was the Travis Credit Union Solar Array. It's a design review request to install ground-mounted and carport-mounted solar arrays behind the existing Travis Credit Union and within the parking lot of that campus located at 1 Travis Way. Another project that we got was a modification to the former Burger King building located at 1330 East Monte Vista for the purpose of establishing a Starbucks restaurant. Those changes include new exterior paint and finishes, as well as some signage and some drive-through equipment upgrades. We also received a request for PG&E to upgrade their existing security fence at their location. They have a service center at 158 Peabody Road, and they're looking at changing the fence to include, I think it's 8 feet, 10 feet on the side property lines and 8 feet on the front property lines, with new card readers, pedestals, and intercoms for the entrance and exit gates. We received and processed a minor modification to a planned sign program for Travis Credit Union. That was mainly to add a new pylon sign on Allison Drive, and then a smaller monument sign on Travis Way. So you might see those things happening. And then some smaller projects was administrative clearance to reduce a setback, a rear yard setback, for the purpose of people looking to add onto the back of their home. During September, we approved 3 projects. One was for a new custom home at 5,700, that consists of 5,700 square feet. It's a 2-story single-family house on a 3.5-acre lot at 4215 Vine Court. Another recent approval was the Director of Community Development approved a modification request to change the exterior of an existing building at 301 Main Street to accommodate a new restaurant called Nebula Bar and Grill. So you might see some changes occurring to that building and potentially that business opening up soon. During September, we received 17 home-based business permits, and we approved 27. And during September, we processed 70 building permit plan checks that required the Planning Division's review, which included header tank lines, Cerrito plot plans, that's the Parkside subdivision over in Southtown area and Vanna Meadows, as well as Saratoga and Vanna Meadows, the Vanna Estates subdivision, and the Cambridge development. So still a lot of development going on, a lot of it having to do with single-family development. And then during September, we helped process approximately 110 development-related inquiries. So that's it for current planning. I'm here to answer any questions.
Any questions from commissioners? No blue hands popping up. We'll go over to advanced planning. Mr. Vidaria, looks like that one's yours.
Thank you. So you did receive reports on 3 of the larger projects that the advanced planning staff is working on or participating in this evening: the code update, the downtown specific plan, and work on the vehicle miles traveled topic that you just heard about. A few other things ongoing. We are continuing to receive studies and reports related to the Green Tree project out at the old Green Tree Golf Course. So these are just some of the preliminary studies that will be used eventually for the environmental impact report. Staff is also working with the utilities department, assisting them in going through the public review period on the city's recycled water master plan project. So that is a project that would connect a number of development areas to the city's recycled water system, and is going through its CEQA public review period right now. And finally, the staff are participating in the development of grant applications for park and recreation improvements in the Markham Brown Street neighborhood. So several different potential projects are being studied and designed for the area, and will be the subject of some grant applications coming up later this year. I think that does it for the advanced planning report this time.
Any questions for Mr. Baderi? Seeing no blue hands, we'll go over to Mr. Salazar for the building division.
Good evening. This is a status update for the month of September. Moving to the next slide, you can see that September, slightly more inspections this September than last year at the same time, 1,346 distributed among 3 inspectors. And as you can see from the display, the trend line is still pretty consistent. There doesn't seem to be a downward trend or cycle, and very consistent with last year. 37 single-family homes, on the next slide, 37 single-family homes received final inspection approval. And of those inspections, of those 1,346 inspections, the breakdown, 70 plan reviews, the breakdown was Fabiola completed 419 of those, Tim Hallett 589, and Greg Okander 303, and he also did 70 plan reviews. And I was covering for a couple people when they took some days off, so I managed to get a few inspections in September. The building applications, which is sort of the building applications are the beginning of the permit issuance process. We ended up with 460 in September. And as you can see, compared to last year, we're trending about the same number of applications per month as we were last year. September permits, we issued 454, slightly more than last year at the same time, distributed among 3 permit staff. Kristen Botello did an amazing number of 83 single-family dwelling unit permits in September alone. That's one of the highest months ever in the history. And about 50% of all our permits in September were issued online. And Debbie Fowler and Rebecca Diaz processed tuitions, about 185 permits among themselves. Then related to our ECAS, our solar permits trend line to reduce greenhouse gases, we're running lower than last year from month to month, but we're issuing about the same number. So that's good news in terms of our strategy to reduce greenhouse gases. And that's all I have for the September update.
Any questions for Mr. Salazar? Seeing none, I will thank staff for all 3 of those presentations on where we are. Item number 10, Director's Report. 10A, City Council Actions. Mr. Baderi, I assume this is from you?
Yes, it is. So at the City Council, at their last meeting, did approve a resolution directing the city staff in several departments to proceed with the park and recreation planning grants that I mentioned a moment ago. And there are 3 different projects that are under review at this point by the city staff, from the housing department, park and recreation department, and the community development department, and also public works department participating in the analysis. So these would involve some improvements to the existing Trower Park, potential for development of a combination city office and recreation facility at the Brown Street property behind the county social services building, and some improvements to the Rocky Hill Trail corridor, which was the subject of a master plan prepared by a group of local youth in the neighborhood working with a UC Davis design studio class earlier this year. So the council directed the staff to proceed with evaluating those projects, seeing which would be the most effective in competing for some of the large amount of state park and recreation grant money currently available. And an item that was mentioned in the early presentation on the fire standards, the City Council did adopt the fire protection easement for the reserve at Browns Valley Phase 3 project. This is one of the projects that is tucked up close to the hillsides at the back of the Cheyenne area and will be subject to some additional fire protection standards contained in these fire protection easements. And so those are the 2 items relating back to items that the commission has seen before or potentially will see in the future that happened at the last council. Any questions on those?
Don't see any. Let's proceed with our future agenda.
Hey, and so for your next Planning Commission meeting in November, as Tyra mentioned earlier, we may have a report back to you on another component of the downtown specific plan. This could involve review of the safety plan that she summarized for you this evening, and possibly either November or December, we'd like to have some discussion on development standards. So some of those things I think she mentioned, such as setbacks and building coverage and height limits and things of those natures. So those topics are being worked on now by the city staff and the consultant team, and we may have some information ready for you by your November meeting. And at this time, I think that looks like the items that have lined up for your your November meeting. Possible on the code update, we will be doing some additional analysis in order to proceed to the Solano County Airport Land Use Commission, which we take all changes to zoning codes to their commission first to receive a determination of consistency with the airport compatibility plans before we return to the Planning Commission with any draft documents. However, I did want to mention that we are certainly continuing to accept comments from any interested persons on the code update because we do have time to address items that may come up. And as the commissioners will remember, at your last presentation by consultant Roger Eastman, he did advise us that changes to code, rewritten codes happen frequently. And so we're certainly happy to take the opportunity to go through any topics that the commission or members of the public may think of in the meantime that we could potentially address before presenting you with a final draft. And I think that does it for the director's report. I think I would like to say thank you to all of the staff. I think you had presentations from perhaps a majority percentage of the staff in community development this evening, as well as a very large number of staff helping from other departments and consultant teams. So it was I want to thank everybody for all their work in getting ready for tonight's meeting, and I hope the information was helpful for the commission.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate you reminding us of that. Now the chance for our commissioners to have comments on anything kind of for the good of the order before we wrap up. Would any of the commissioners like to comment? Don't see any blue hands. Don't see Commissioner Aldrich with her hand up. So I think that is bringing us to the end of the evening. Thank you, everyone who participated. And until our meeting of Tuesday, November 17th, the Planning Commission is adjourned. Good night.